Welcome, everyone, and many thanks to those of you who have participated throughout the day today in our symposium on defending democracy with deliberative technologies. I want to welcome those of you who are just joining us. On behalf of the Keough School of Global Affairs, I'd like to extend my gratitude to other parts of the University of Notre Dame system, the Pulte Policy Platform, the Keough Institute, and the Lucy Family Institute for Data and Society, who are co-sponsoring different parts of today's program. It is my distinct pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Nobel Peace Prize laureate, co-founder, and CEO of Rappler, and also the 2024 Distinguished Policy Fellow at the University of Notre Dame's Keough School of Global Affairs. Our keynote speaker has been a journalist in Asia for more than 37 years and co-founded Rappler, the top digital-only news site that is leading the fight for press freedom in the Philippines. As Rappler's CEO and president, she has endured constant political harassment and arrests by the Duterte government. She's been forced to post bail 10 times to stay free. Over the course of her life, countless organizations have given her awards for her commitment to public interest journalism. For her courage and her work on disinformation, she has received numerous awards and accolades, including from Time Magazine, BBC, UNESCO, and many others. In October 2021, she was one of 2 journalists awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in recognition of her efforts to safeguard freedom of expression, which is a precondition for democracy and lasting peace. Rappler's battle for truth and democracy is the subject of the 2020 Sundance Film Festival documentary, 1,000 Cuts. Before co-founding Rappler, she focused on investigating terrorism in Southeast Asia. She ran CNN's Manila bureau for nearly a decade. She opened the network's Jakarta bureau and managed about 1,000 journalists for the largest news organization in the Philippines as senior vice president of ABS-CBN's multimedia news operations. Maria Ressa is the author of several books, including most recently, How to Stand Up to a Dictator. May we never need to follow through on that. Most importantly, Maria Ressa has devoted her life. You're laughing, sorry. Maria Ressa has devoted her life to the well-being and human dignity. In the midst of fame and attention, she continues to provide a guiding light, helping us see how we can protect democracy in these days of chaos and concern for the future of humanity. Tonight, she will share with us her stories and analysis of tech opportunities and threats to democracy. Please join me in offering a warm welcome to Maria Ressa.
Thank you. I didn't mean to disturb you. So, you know, the woman who was helping me, her name is Maria Ressa. So, Maria Ressa. Anyway, sorry. What an incredibly geeky day it's been. I really love it. And it's good to see so many friends in the audience. You know, I think the story I'll tell you is where the rubber hits the pavement. And your question about communities, you know, what do we do with the technology that's there? It is about the communities. And I think it's something journalists are just figuring out now, and we're not doing such a good job at it yet, right? So I start with all the bad things first. I will depress you because I think so much is at stake this year, and hopefully come out with potential solutions, which is why we're here. So first, it starts there. November 2022, How to Stand Up with a Dictator came out the same week as ChatGPT. And so within a day and a half, someone came up to me while I was signing books and said, here's what ChatGPT said about your book. I was like, oh, how nice, thank you. And then, anyway, I'll tell you more about that later. It was translated to about 20 different languages. The most interesting one is the French were the most like pushy. It's how to stand up to a dictator, but they said, resist dictators, right? Don't just stand up against them, resist. And then the Japanese is the most passive. It actually changed the title slightly. South Korea, we're headed to Korea tonight. The South Korean one is pretty much. And then I like this one because it's Mandarin. And it went for Taiwan, I think, largely. It was translated to Arabic. I mean, why am I telling you all of this? Because it was the countries that were most worried about democracy that translated it. A Polish translation just came out, and Poland was the bright light of the last year, right? That is just coming out. I'm doing the interview for the launch. I summarize in just 3 points, and a lot of what we've said today is about trying to get consultative groups together. What's the biggest shift, right? Data is the biggest shift, but in the end, it allowed countries and all of us to circumvent institutions and go directly to the cellular level of a democracy. Today, it is a person-to-person defense of democracy, right? Every person. Please never call a journalist an influencer. But our kids want to be influencers, right? So I like what you said about AI. We'll go into that a little bit more. The death by 1,000 cuts, this is how our world shifts. It was also how in the Philippines, we lost our rights. It's like Madeleine Albright said it. It's like slicing a salami. But for us, it was, oh, it's not that bad, slash, 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 and you're just bleeding out. And you don't realize how weak you've become until you die. Well, like right now I'm fighting. So I almost didn't make it to you today because I was pushing myself so hard in the last week that I have like an autoimmune eczema. Now, I'll tell you more about that too. You get to know a lot of stuff. And the doctor said, go and sleep for 2 weeks. Who can sleep for 2 weeks today, right? Anyway, so death by 1,000 cuts. And then the last part is, how do we go to that cellular level? Whatever it is you're most afraid of, embrace it. And prepare for it. So Americans, prepare for it. Right? I'm worried your big tech is preparing for it, which is why not enough is being done to safeguard, to put guardrails in place. Now, right? Embrace your fear. Because now it's individual. It is an individual battle for courage, for values, for integrity. Yeah, that's what our tech has done. We came out a year and a half ago. Dmitry Muratov and I came out with a 10-point action plan, largely driven by the EU, because the US has been such a laggard at this one. In the Nobel lecture, I said, reform or revoke Section 230. Right. That's an easy one, because right now there's no accountability for the gatekeepers of our public information sphere. The public information ecosystem, our shared reality, is chaotic because there's absolute immunity. Our tech, the social media platforms, I love how so few of you really talked about the tech as much, but in 2018, social media shared lies, rewarded people who were lying 6 times more than those boring truth tellers. And if you lace our data in the Philippines, if you lace whatever your message is, your lie, and you lace it with fear, anger, and hate, it spreads even faster. With Twitter turning into X, when Elon Musk bought it, it's gotten worse, right? So, I mean, just laying it out. So the 10 things we said, and this has been signed by 300 Nobel laureates, civil society groups, 3 basic things. Right? Stop surveillance for profit. Because everything is built on our data, that we never gave consent. It isn't the way our data, the way we have been cloned, we've never given permission for it. That's the first. And large language models or generative AI builds on surveillance capitalism, right? It hasn't stopped. It's gotten worse. I told you I'm going to tell you bad news first. The second, stop coded bias. If you are a woman, LGBTQ+, if you are brown, it's going to work against you. If you're marginalized in the real world, you're further marginalized in the virtual world. I did an interview with Urvashi Aneja, who runs the digital lab, Futures Lab in Goa, India, and she said that colonialism moved online and that people in the global south, we like to call ourselves the global majority, that people in the global south are colonized twice because the code coming to us is from Silicon Valley largely. Of course, China now, but the second thing is, who cleans it up for you? We in the global south. And then finally, the third, journalism as an antidote to tyranny. And yet, hand in hand with that, I think digital news has 2 years to survive. And that is because the 3 ways you find news organizations online, there's only 3: direct traffic, search, and social. Social traffic has gone down beginning January 2018 because Meta, once known as Facebook, Meta has choked traffic because they didn't solve the problem they first created. Right? So what they did instead is to slowly choke traffic, and traffic to news organizations has dropped between 50% to 85%. I can send, I was gonna say I'll tweet it, but, so that's the first. The second is, once SGE rolls out completely, do you guys know SGE? Search Generative Experience. One search generative experience. It's out in 125 countries. The US is a test case. The Philippines is another case. Once that rolls out, it goes through it takes all of our content as LLM, and then it does not give a link back to our websites. 60% of Rappler's traffic comes from search because I focused on search after social media was so disappointing. All right, I told you good things. So, of course, we saw all of this coming a year ago, and I was like, what are we gonna do? And this is where I hope we move forward. I talked about this as a change of scale has brought a major transformation. It is big data. It is not about content. It is not about the tools. It is about data at this massive scale that has changed our world. And it's changed our world because the way the big tech companies have rolled it out is by hacking our biology to change the way we feel, which changes the way we see the world, which changes the way we act, i.e. the way we vote. Right? This is a whole, and there's tons of studies now that have been done, but I have lots of data on the Philippines. And I've seen it there, right? So the 2 buckets of artificial intelligence. We have a professor for artificial intelligence here. Mine is more, what's the right word? Learned in the trenches. For social media, machine learning came in. Facebook owned the Philippines. By 2018, which is when the government first tried to shut Rappler down, 100% of Filipinos on the internet were on Facebook. Facebook is our internet. Our comparison in Europe is Slovakia. Right? That's Facebook country too. So you see the shifts they make first in our countries. So what happens? If you put in posts on Facebook, I'm sorry, I have to call it Facebook. What it does is machine learning first comes in and builds a model of you. That model is a very, what's the right word? It flattens the meaning. What is really a model? Machine learning clones you. So builds a clone of you, And then artificial intelligence comes in and takes all of our clones and creates the motherlode database that is used to micro-target. Micro-targeting is not media advertising. We could never manipulate in the same way. Did they mean to do it? Because they'll say, well, we didn't mean to do it. Doesn't matter. It is what it is, right? So micro-targeting takes your weakest moment to a message and sells it to a company, that's the new advertising, or a country, that's information operations, information warfare for Americans, right? In 2016, you had 126 million Americans touched by this. I'm just shocked that not more has been done. I'm such a good, so that's the first part. Have we solved any of it? No, because it is the design. These platforms make the most money by fueling your fear, anger, and hate. They want you to keep scrolling. You know, having said that, Rappler would like you to keep scrolling as well. But I wouldn't manipulate. It goes against our standards and ethics. In fact, one of the tech guys asked me, they said, you know, Maria, you could just build bots to do that. I was like, we're not allowed to do that. And he said, why? Because we have standards and ethics. So that's really your problem. You said engineers? Yes, I know. You know, my greatest. So having said that, what did they do? They had palliative measures in place. Right? And you had some of them in place. I'll give you an example. In 2020, in your 2020 elections, they did put measures in place that helped your, But soon after elections, they took it away. And let me talk about one thing that I know is now out in the public sphere. Something like group invites, right? Bulk invites. Did you know that that one decision, allowing a group to do bulk invites, probably led to the violence on Capitol Hill? Because those bulk invites allowed a new Facebook page. So what they did is they kept it through elections, and right after elections, they added it back. And when they did, there was a new Facebook page called Stop the Steal that grew by 400,000 per day. 400,000, right? I looked at your site too, that's good. So anyway, these are all a growth, and here's an interesting one, right? Something we lived through in the Philippines. Every single social media platform uses friends of friends algorithm for growth. You've probably heard me say this, right? In the Philippines, we never debated the facts. We were all here. And yet, by 2016, so 2014 was the year that news organizations really lost our gatekeeping powers. That was also the year that Russia ceded the meta-narrative to annex Crimea. That same meta-narrative was then reused in 2022 to invade Ukraine itself. It was also the year that Ferdinand Marcos Jr. began to change the narrative of, it's like Milan Kundera's quote came to life. The struggle of man against power is the struggle of memory against forgetting. In 2014, Ferdinand Marcos Jr., the son of our former dictator, changed what Marcos meant, a former kleptocrat dictator, and began to change it. We watched it in plain sight to the greatest leader the Philippines has ever known. It worked. He won by 33% in 2022. So that's actually their direct effects. I'm only on this slide. Let me go to generative AI. I haven't told you that yet, right? Wait, so I hadn't told you about the Friends of Friends. What did that do in 2016? 2014 was when they seeded the meta-narratives, but it took roughly 2 years to impact our politics. And the Philippines was the first place. Rodrigo Duterte was elected. Katie Harbath from Facebook had come to the Philippines, had talked about how important Facebook has done. And that Friends of Friends algorithm, if you voted for Duterte, you moved further right. If you were anti-Duterte, you moved further left. And over time, that polarization grew. That is the beginning of the polarization, right? The recommendation engine brings the radicalization. They're very similar things, from studying counterterrorism and the way radicalism works, that is now embedded in our political system because of our information ecosystem, right? Because it isn't the kinds of technology you've been talking about today, because that would never have maintained the attention economy, right? So that's let me go to generative AI. It builds on the mistakes of the past. Think about how social media never made a distinction between fact and fiction. LLMs did the exact same thing. LLMs, large language models, they don't care. And really, if these companies wanted to do better, they could anchor large language models. They have to be more transparent about what data they're feeding, but they can anchor and create a knowledge graph that would anchor it. But why don't they? Because that requires humans to do it, right? This is just $50 billion were invested in large language models last year. And right now, it's all speculative. And you're already seeing, what is the use of this? Well, we'll see. Generative AI means just pushing, or maybe our computer science guy, our AI guy. Generative AI, how would you quickly define it?
Essentially, the idea is for you to create a large enough model to capture, quote unquote, foundational things like language or vision. And if you crack that, then you have the ability to reproduce it after. So you can generate data based on that cracking of language and vision.
I'm sorry, I really put him on the spot. See, but he was great. Yes, but this idea of garbage in is garbage out is also true, right? It was fed all the crap of social media. It was fed. It never made a distinction. So this idea of pumping in as much data as you can, hoping that statisticals, instead of doing a knowledge graph, they anchored it on statistics. It's very lazy, actually. And then they asked neural networks to do this. That's why it still hallucinates. I love these new words. A journalist would die making up words like these. It hallucinates. A journalist would not roll out a product that doesn't give accurate answers, right? So, I have many friends in tech. Anyway, generative AI, right? So this is where we are. I go back to social media. This is the same design, the opportunity, an unpredictable reward, and then the quick repeatability. That's the design of a slot machine. It is also the design of social media. And it is also part of the reason, finally, the Surgeon General of the United States came out with a report in May last year that finally identified something we had been pointing out forever, which is the impact on kids. I keep thinking, you care more about the kids, but it's doing this to us, right? Because for me in particular, these bottom-up social media attacks that came up were followed. You say a lie a million times, it becomes a fact, because facts don't exist. And then the other part is the minute this came up, a year later, the weaponization of the law happened, right? So this is that design that kept people addicted. In the Nobel lecture, I talked about it as a behavior modification system. The Surgeon General said, what did he say? He wasn't that straightforward yet. I want more bullseye language, which is, you now have kids who can't sleep as much, who have eating disorders, young girls who, more teen suicides, right? And then the last part of what he said was fascinating to me. He said there's an epidemic of loneliness. An epidemic of loneliness. Cheryl Turkle, many years ago, wrote a book called Alone Together. But here's the last part. Generative AI is set to weaponize our loneliness. If you go on a new AI, Replika, Replika, if you check it out, it promises to give you a constant companion of yourself. generative AI created, right? So anyway, so what had all these? So shortened attention spans. This is what it's led to, the tribalism, the friends of friends algorithms I told you about, the doxing, dogpiling, bullying, and harassment. We have new words. And yet at the same time, as Sophia Noble has said, we have had a flattening of meaning. How do our kids search for meaning? And then finally, the last part. If our emotions are hacked, even before social media, 85% of how we vote is not based on what we think. It is not a thinking slow process. It's based on how we feel. And with social media, I called it a toxic sludge in the Nobel lecture. Without doing it, it is not a surprise the world is where it is today, right? We have seen, this is VDEM from a year ago. They said 72% of the world is now under authoritarian rule. That increased from the year earlier from 60%. This is the tipping point year, 2024. And how you vote here will tip the world. Yeah, so there's a lot to do. All right, so let me say some of the stuff that we did do. This is what I lived through, right? All of the attacks, and I'm going through the attacks again right now. This is the very first. We've had 20 waves of attacks, 20 waves of different ways. Social media will do something, then the people who are constantly, it's a war, right? So the minute they figure out what it is, they come back at it again. So this is the first wave that attacked journalists. It attacks anyone who was anti-Duterte, actually, is what this network did. And this is still a time when it was ABS-CBN, Mark is in the back. This was still at a time, this was the very first one when we hadn't gotten fractured yet in as many places as we have. So this was a network in the Philippines, because again, the data is available. This is the kind of stuff that it sent out about me. Women, journalists, politicians, researchers, we get the brunt of the attacks, and gendered disinformation is one of the first signs of a retreating democracy, right? I have eczema or atopic dermatitis. It's had it my whole life. And so what they did is, I don't know if they thought I would die from shame, they started using it. I thought, well, I guess that means they can't find anything else. So then they started doing this, and then they did the dehumanization part. Don't drink anything. The nickname they created for me was Scrotum Face. And then it took a long time for Facebook to take it down, for Twitter to take it down. Because if you bring it up to them, what they would have said was, but you're a public figure. And it was so new that I forgot, well, no, actually, I'm a journalist. And we have certain protections, right? So, yeah, it's kind of ugly. But dehumanization leads to violence when you're no longer human. And I haven't gotten it the worst. UNESCO came out with a report on women journalists last year. It's 300 pages. And you can see how difficult it is. International Center for Journalists actually did this survey. 73% experienced online abuse. Women experienced online abuse. 25% received threats of physical violence. And of that 25%, 20% were attacked or abused in the real world, right? So this is all connected. There's only one person that lives in both worlds, you, right? So it happens. But I gotta move to the generative AI before I show you some of the solutions for it. Oh gosh, all right, I'm gonna move fast. This just came out March 3rd. We have another piece coming out, hopefully with more data. But we found a deep fake of me that came out through a Russian network, and it was an advertising network. So you see, this is the difference. things that were used for advertising and marketing are now being used for politics, and they don't make the distinction. So I don't know if you'll hear the audio, but this is kind of funny. So this is the audio. Today I want to share one of my big secrets. What helped me to become a successful person is to quickly jump into new opportunities without any hesitation. And right now, my #1 source of income is a new automated cryptocurrency trading program. This is the biggest opportunity I've seen in my entire life to make a big fortune quickly. You can invest 14,500 Philippine pesos and earn from 120,000 monthly without much labor. I urge everyone to check this out before the banks shut down this platform. I never said that. They took an audio LLM and spliced it edited it onto the video, right? I mean, if you really look at it, this is what I'd actually said. Never seen before, but the same methodology. Bottom-up social media, lies, a fact. It sounds pretty real though, right? I mean, sorry, I go from that generative AI scam, and I'll remind you again of what's happening here in the United States. I really want to scare you. So look, this is from the Election Integrity Partnership. This is the seeding of the meta-narrative that led to the violence on Capitol Hill. It was first seeded in August 2019, an op-ed on RT. So these are the academics who worked on this that came out with this, right? And then on Darren Beatty on Steve Bannon began the mainstreaming a year later on August 2020. Then Tucker Carlson came out with it. And then, of course, the super spreaders, QAnon was still allowed. Imagine, QAnon was allowed to grow on social media. Was anyone ever held accountable for all the lies that were done, for all the emotions and minds that were changed, for the worldviews that were changed? So QAnon has been banned now. I guess they're back in some places. Anyway, QAnon drops it, then President Trump stopped the steal, right? But then what's happened? This is why I think we're walking into US elections with far less guardrails. Now, those academics have subpoenas. And actually, some of them are my friends, and I was saying, guys, it's only a subpoena. I do, but it's different. It's a person-to-person defense of democracy. And so some of it will depend on your schools. Do you want to deal with legal cases? Are you willing to put yourself on the line? These are the questions you have to answer now, because they are coming out. We saw what happened with the women heads of the Ivy League schools. I wonder why none of the journalists actually did a story. When I was watching that from the Philippines, I thought, is that the United States? These are women presidents of universities. But no one did the story of Elise Stefanik. Why was that a question? Why was it a question? Was it a question legislatively? All right, I've told you all the bad news. So now we'll really tell you. All right, I will move this quickly. How do you rebuild trust? This is how we do it. 3 pillars in Rappler. So let me give you the context of Rappler. Rappler is 12 years old this February. We're about 120 people. We hit anywhere from 15 million to 50 million uniques per month. So we're sizable. In fact, we just beat at the end of last year, we beat the top 2 television networks. And we're nipping at the heels. And we do this with community. Remember, we came under intense attack in the last administration, right? So these are some of the things that worked for us. We realized people will come together when you ask them to help each other. This was our very first successful community building effort. It was because in the Philippines, we get an average of 20 typhoons every year. And our government can't handle it on its own. So we built a platform, it's called Project Agos, and we built an entire system of prepare, respond, recover. We created a site where we handed it to the Philippine government. The National Disaster Council took it. I have a civic engagement team that sat at the Office of Civil Defense those are not the journalists. Our journalists are outside waiting for information while our civic engagement team was inside helping the government to rescue people, because that's what you do, right? Let me quickly show you this one. Tell me if you can hear it. Glenda, known internationally as Ramasun, intensifies as it moves closer to the Bicol Samar area. This is actually the website with layered data on it, where the landslide prone areas, where's the path of the typhoon, right? And all the stuff you see came from Typhoon Glenda. Really crowdsourcing, I love. It's all, so I can tell you, add more here, right? This is a whole of society approach to climate change is what we were trying to do. And it worked for, well, up until the Duterte administration canceled it, because we had one goal. So all of these were posted on the sites. We all used the same hashtag for typhoons. At that point, Twitter was extremely reliable. It still allowed us to see the data because all of the garbage hadn't come out yet, right? And it was pretty incredible. That's where I was looking at, this is where Polis was also coming up, right? This is the stuff I loved. And the goal was real. The goal is zero casualty. And we brought death counts in the thousands to less than 10, right? So there was a very real goal, and it worked. And then President Duterte got elected, and the government threw it away. This is a second example, which I don't think will work anymore, but I had hoped it would. The tech companies change it much quicker. This was our whole of society approach to facts, right? Because it's not bipartisan, as everyone would like to hear you to think. It's not about being a Democrat or a Republican. It is about whether we are inside a building in Washington, D.C., right? No one will argue against that. So what we did in the Philippines was to form a facts-first pyramid, 4 layers, where you had 16 news organizations with a quota of fact checks. Fact checks don't spread on social media, which is why you had the second layer called MESH. These were civil society groups, business organizations, the church. The Philippines is Asia's largest Roman Catholic nation. Religion is important. Don't forget that. This is distribution, 116 groups. Every day we did something. It's like an influencer marketing campaign for facts. And we looked at the data, and every day we said, this is what you need to share. And when we share, you have to share with emotion. And guess what we found? What spreads as fast as anger? It's really cool. Inspiration. It's harder to inspire, but inspiration spreads as fast as anger. The academics that we worked with, there were 8 research groups that then took the data, because we did a data pipeline. We did this in coordination with the Google News Initiative and Midan, which is actually a data platform based in San Francisco. We pushed it to universities, and the universities weekly did a who won and who lost. They did an analysis of what was getting pumped to them. And then finally, the last one, you cannot have rule of law if you don't have facts. The legal groups got involved. And they actually filed in 3 months more than 20 cases to help protect the layer pyramid. And again, we did all of the things, right? Remember, the median age in the Philippines is 23 years old. We're a young demographic, 112 million people. And this is how it played out, right? When you look at the data, we clustered into 4 groups. You see the news groups, people who cluster around news. You see the artists clustering together, the activists clustered together, but this I loved, faith clusters together as well. It's very similar in the United States, but it breaks down in a much more complex and scary manner in the US. This is the strategy we used. Again, it was an influencer marketing campaign for facts, right? And this was 2022. I don't think this would work in 2024, right? We will try, but I'll show you some of the other things. So this is what we did. Every single Facebook page was documented on a daily basis. We had our own influencer marketing campaign. And finally, this is the moment when we took over the center of the information ecosystem in the Philippines, right? The ripple is the yellow. Blue is actually the core. The orange are the boundary spanners, and then the ripple. So this is just using social network analysis on the stuff that's there. So I guess I'm just saying that there are lots of things we can do, except that may not work anymore. So here's where we are today. I keep saying what happens in the Philippines comes for you sooner or later. So don't think you are immune. We've decided to build our own tech. And since this has been a day where we use our tech, right, deliberatively, we built a matrix protocol chat app that connects to Rappler. Because I think that this is the only way news will survive in a federated approach. We build our communities, we take it back from the tech companies. It's working so far. And then we share those communities federated without the friction of how to get into the matrix protocol, right? You connect the matrix protocol to the login of your website. If you want to try it, you can look at it. You can go to Maria's journal. I say a lot more things there that I probably shouldn't say, but I figured, why not? It looks like this. So this is like in our climate change thing. We rolled it out right before Christmas, I think, because we were quietly rolling it out. So this was climate change. But this is mine when I had to sit on a leadership panel. I'm the vice chair of the Internet Governance Forum's leadership panel. But I like this one where Kara Swisher had given me an advance copy of her book and we had a discussion about it. One of the discussions, I was asking, guess who Kara calls Uncle Satan? Elon. No, Jeff. No, Mark. Wait, who doesn't she call Uncle Satan is a better. Guess who she called Uncle Satan? Did you read Kara's book? Rupert Murdoch, which is funny. We did other things, because we do have to play with the tech, right? Every story on Rappler has a generative AI 3-bullet point summary. But how did we do it? We focused it. We did use OpenAI. We're an OpenAI partner as well. But it hasn't lied because it's so focused. Every page has it. What did it do? It increased time on site without manipulating you. Because there are two groups that have done this in the world. There's a Swedish news group and Rappler. We rolled it out very quietly in July last year, because who knew what would happen, right? Finally, we keep playing with AI. This team of our kids, I call them our kids, they beat 113 other news groups to win this AI and journalism challenge. I refuse to put it on Rappler. It goes on social media. They call it TLDR. You know TLDR? It creates video, automated. But I don't want to put it on Rappler. I want to put quality content on Rappler. So that goes on social, right? I didn't say that. Anyway, we also were one, after about 1,000 groups, we also were chosen by OpenAI to run a democracy challenge. And what we found out is you can't just do it online, right? How do we use LLMs to increase democratic participation? We laid out a 5-step process. In addition to face-to-face, to an online survey, we also created an AI bot. I can't remember what our kids called it. Anyway, we created an AI bot that helped in the discussion, very similar to Polis, but it's so interesting how to put it all together. I'm ending now, back to here, right? Please remember the big picture. We're building on surveillance capitalism. We don't want surveillance capitalism, and America needs to take action in this. The second, we have to stop coded bias. You make it illegal in the real world, but you don't make it illegal in the virtual world. And journalism as an antidote to tyranny. we must survive this time period, but our business model is dead, right? So, generative AI can never tell you exactly what is happening in this room at this moment in time. It can predict and will most likely lie about it, right? So, we will find a way forward. I just don't know what that is. But here's the thing, the same question. I asked Filipinos, what will you sacrifice for the truth? In the Philippines today, we did elect Ferdinand Marcos Jr., but we've moved from hell under Duterte to purgatory. I only have 2 criminal cases left out of like 14, right? I mean, it took years. And in order to come to you here, I still have to ask for Supreme Court approval to travel. But we're still here. So please don't let your country, you don't want to get a firsthand taste of all of this. Thank you.
We're going to take some questions. Who has something to ask? Andrew.
Hi, Andrew. I checked your site.
Oh, thank you.
We met your Rappler team when we were with Open.
Yeah, we collaborate with them. I guess my question for you is simple. What gives you hope?
You know, it's strangely an exciting time. Like when we came under attack, first online, right? It was both a blessing and a curse. It was a curse because we came under attack, but it was a blessing because I had all the data I needed. That was one. And then the other part is like I felt like what I did mattered, right? I wasn't going to give up. So that gives me hope in the power of the individual. And finally, the third part, guys, it's exciting. We're creating this right now. We are creating this. Your kids will hold you accountable if it goes wrong. I should ask you, what gives you hope? What gives me hope? Our Rapplers. So I turned 60, but the median age in Rappler is 23 years old. It's very young, very driven. I don't think we could have survived the Duterte years because we do things like a quarterly drill of shutdown. You have to drill it so that no one is surprised if and when it happens, right? So, yeah, we survived.
Who's next? All right.
My question is, hi, my name is Christine Magoma. I'm one of the Harvard Youth Fellows with Ned here, and I'm working on countering disinformation, especially in Africa. I come from Kenya, and disinformation is really driving conflicts. Yeah. Exactly, thank you. And my question is, something has just come up when I was having a conversation with one of the previous speakers, Caleb. How can we get people to self-reflect more? Because with AI, with social media, we have very many people who are consuming and sharing data and information, but we hardly ever step back to self-reflect before we act. So from your perspective, how do we do that?
You know, we actually did some work in Kenya on sexual reproductive health rights. And it was fascinating because it spanned the time of Roe versus Wade. Like of post, right, when that happened. And the same thing, you asked, will people step back to reflect? Rarely. And that is the problem. When you're the gatekeeper, when you're the journalist, you know you don't want to inflame. You want to catch people's attention, but you don't want to inflame because people, Lord knew I never wanted to be responsible for any violence, right? I don't think the new gatekeepers have that same responsibility. What we saw in Kenya during that time period was that the people who had the facts were really boring. They stuck to the facts. And then the ones the disinformation that was coming in was laced, and it was a combination of commercial products that were lies. So people were falling for the lies, and women were falling for the lies, and then the religious right also coming in. There's a lot of hope in Gen Z, and I'm going to walk right into Gaza. The Gaza is also, they're getting attacked on all sides with information operations. So I worry, how will we survive this? Sorry, that's such a long answer to a simple question. It's up to you. You hopefully tried to step back, but I don't see it. Sorry, we have to say it. Collaborate in communities of action, right? Communities of action based on facts.
Trying to get some new hands in the room. Can you stand up, mister, and speak really loudly?
All right. Hi, Maria.
I know this guy.
Oh.
Introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Mike Navalio. I'm a Reagan Pascal Fellow at NED. So I do want to ask Maria, to what extent do you think this information played a role in the 2022 Philippine elections? Because we're looking at, there was huge disinformation against the opposition. But at the same time, if you look at Taiwan and Brazil, how is it possible that in their case, the opposition or the ruling party in Taiwan were able to overcome this information?
So different. So the info ops, and Mike was a reporter for the largest network in the Philippines. I used to have the thing of when I'm like being arrested, Mike would be coming along behind trying to figure, Maria, come in. No, he's a lawyer and a justice reporter, now with Ned. The Philippines was a rare thing. It really was Milan Kundera's quote, because we watched the country forget. And, you know, one of the first things I saw of Bongbong Marcos, who's a charming man, was when he was pretending he had a Jedi cloak on, and he had a lightsaber. He was not serious. It was like TikTok, right? But he was doing it on YouTube. So the seeding of the meta-narratives, right? I like him. I didn't like him. I mean, this is what people said, right? So the shifting of history was bit by bit. Death by 1,000 cuts works in a lot of different ways. So yes, starting in 2019, Rappler began doing data stories that showed you the disinformation networks that were changing our history. That one, I'll tweet it. I'll exit after. So yes, I think it laid the groundwork, but it was a perfect storm, like in many different countries around the world. What was the perfect storm? Our economics aren't working right now. The rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer, especially post-pandemic. In the Philippines, we passed two laws that benefited, during COVID, two laws that benefited the wealthy, and no social safety net for the poor. So we had people who were afraid and didn't have enough. And Marcos had his slate united the North and the South. His vice president is the daughter of Rodrigo Duterte. So it was Marcos Duterte was our tandem, and we vote separately for our president and vice president, but they ran. So it was a combination of the machinery that was there, the propaganda that worked. We went into some areas, the poorer parts of Manila, we would ask, so why did you vote for Marcos? And they would say, because we're supposed to get gold. Where did you get that? YouTube. Because there was this myth of the Italiano gold. I can tweet this also. It was a myth because it aimed to explain the hidden wealth of the Marcoses, right? So anyway, I can drag you into the Philippines. I'd love to hear what you think, Mike.
There's a bunch of hands in the back that have not spoken yet. Fabio? Two more. So waiting for Martin.
Thank you, Maria. A very personal question. So some of the images that you've showed of being cyberbullied have made my stomach turn. And according, you're not the one who should be sorry about this. So according to CDC, almost 15% of American teenagers are subject to cyberbullying. Almost 14% seriously attempt suicide. So along the lines of how do you stand up to a dictator, what would be the advice you would give to teens who are subject to cyberbullying?
Thank you for asking. I mean, the first thing is, why should this be legal? Right? And I actually said this in the Nobel lecture. We have to reform or revoke Section 230, where the impunity stops. Impunity online is impunity offline. That's one. But another one is get a basic data privacy law so they're not, there's no accountability for this. There's so much worse. Women journalists really have gotten it, but kids don't have I had a 26-year-old reporter who was getting attacked as much as I was because she was covering Duterte. She had PTSD and had to take a year to recover, but came back stronger. She now heads our civic engagement team, a senior reporter put in front of a civic engagement team. What do I say? Don't be ashamed. It's not about you. And I guess the way I survived it was I looked at it as data. At first, like that thing I showed you, that's not the worst of the lot, but I haven't gotten to the place where I can show you the worst of the lot, because it's a punch in the stomach when you first see it. Actually, that was first sent to me by my mom. And she was like, what are you doing? But for kids, it's much harder. I don't really have an answer for you, but why should they have to deal with this? There are gatekeepers to the public information ecosystem, right? We should be protected. There is no Better Business Bureau to protect our emotions, our souls. So that's part of it. I would say two groups abdicated responsibility. That is the tech companies and governments. The EU is ahead of the lot with the Digital Services Act and the Digital Markets Act, but the attorneys general in the United States are doing their work, but where are we, right? The division among party lines is going to get worse if you don't fix the original problem. You have to go upstream, I always say, right? Think of the information ecosystem as a river that flows downhill, and almost everything we do is like taking a glass of water, cleaning the water, and then throwing it back in. But you have to stop the pollution at the factory. That's what we have to do.
I could listen to you for hours, and I really applaud your courage, and thanks for sharing all those stories. My name is Martin, I work for the United Nations. I was wondering, what's your plea to this community looking at deliberative technologies? And there are new attempts to bring in LLMs into the news sphere, not just to generate content, but also to moderate the kind of the desert of comment sections that we see, where people just, vomit and leave their frustration. And I wonder, how would you like, us as a community to come together to shape that field collectively?
I think the first is please don't believe the hype, right? You can see we experiment with it on Rappler. And right now, even coding, only a third is usable if you use LLM for that. We used it very limited. Large language models, and maybe you will back me up on this, it works if you have a very focused trajectory, right? So like, for example, in the medical field, radiology, right? You can pump it full of stuff and it can do thousands of analysis per second instead of what humans can do. But very specific data, using it for public. I actually was debating with our team on our project with OpenAI, and you were there. We need to chat. Anyway, what I found fascinating in all of that is that I wouldn't want, if I was doing a consultation with you, I wouldn't want an LLM to process it first. I wouldn't know who you are. I wouldn't know where you came from, right? You lose the nuances that make the process work. So this is part of the problem, I think, of trying to summarize. You don't summarize. How do I get your faces, the way you look, the way you sound, right? So anyway, I sound like a tech Luddite. I'm not. I really had hoped tech would help the Philippines jumpstart development. You saw where it brought us. But again, like I said, we're already in purgatory. In terms of the UN, I sit on the leadership panel of the Internet Governance Forum. we need to move faster. I think the UN is doing an amazing job in with the world on fire, but it has to do more. It isn't business as usual. What can it do with tech? There's actually, I would say, leadership in very specific roles. So what's your position on text design? We don't need more committees. The studies have been done, you know? What do we stand for? Because the longer we delay, the more we stand to lose it.
One final question, and then we'll have a reception.
Hi, thank you so much. My name is Colleen Mayer. I'm a second year in the Global Affairs Master's Program at Notre Dame studying sustainable development. And I am a representative of the elder Gen Zs. I just wanted to hear your thoughts. I've seen a lot of conversations about the internet as a human right in development. And if so, what are the implications of that?
I mean, David Kaye, when he was working with what was David Kaye's special rapporteur for information? Yes. He said it should be bounded by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Right now, on the internet, which connects all of us, we have no rights. It is surveillance for profit. It's us commodified. It is journalism commodified, which means what gets the greatest distribution is the crap. I know this from the data I get from Rappler Daily. Stories that take 6 months to do will just not get the widest distribution because you have to think. Are we never gonna think? Right? So the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is something, the 75th anniversary just happened last year. We are in danger of losing it. This is why this year is so critically important, because, I mean, not to remind ourselves, but Hitler was democratically elected. We're at a tipping point.